Sandline International, a British mercenary company, and Heritage Oil and Gas, a British company with connections to the Clintons. And during the war in Congo, this played out in nasty little ways. And Clinton actually, at one time in Hope, Arkansas, one of these mining companies that's close to these guys I'm talking about and close to Clinton set up in Hope, Arkansas. It was called America Mineral Fields International. And America Mineral Fields International eventually went through some morphing. They changed their name 4 or 5 times, and today they're involved in the south of Congo in one of the most lucrative contracts dealing with mining of cobalt and copper. And cobalt is the biggest business in Congo. While diamonds produce roughly $1 billion a year, at least exports for the Congo, it's not benefiting the Congolese people in any sense of the word. But cobalt, this guy Dan Gertler, who's very close with Kabila today, and he's one of these American, Israeli, Zionist forces involved in the Congo today, his father, grandfather are behind the diamond bourse in Tel Aviv. So Israel's number 3 business, I think, is diamonds, and this is all Dan Gertler and his family. Dan Gertler is considered today the unofficial ambassador in the Congo. It used to be this guy, Maurice Templespan. Templespan was very close to, he still is, very close to the Democratic Party. But his interests in Congo have been displaced a little bit. And Templespan's alliance with the Democratic Party, you've then got Gertler's alliance with Bush. So Gertler has been to the White House. He's considered the unofficial ambassador, as I said, and he's also very close with Joseph Kabila. So that brings in Kabila's interests. And so what happens then, this Gertler has just won a contract in the cobalt mining down in the south, where Adastra, this company connected to Clinton, already has a big contract in one mine. And the Gertler mine, for example, the input, the money, the investment that they're talking about, I think, is $2 billion investment. That tells you how much money is going to be made on the cobalt, you know, a 40-50% profit in the end, because it's Congo, that's what they do there. I mean, they can literally get away with murder without paying anything and make 40-50% profits. But the $2 billion investment compared to diamonds themselves, which are $1 billion in exports. So the cobalt is a massive, massive business. But going back to the diamonds, so on March 22nd to 26th of this year, just recently, there was this mini-war in Kinshasa, and it was the president and his diamond interests and mining interests and mercenary connections and petroleum connections and U.S. government connections fighting against Jean-Pierre Bemba, the guy who didn't win the elections and wouldn't gracefully accept a lesser position in the government, which he was actually offered. They had a little war, and it's very clear how it all began, and they just started fighting. And what has not been reported about this little war is, first of all, that it was about mining and diamonds and all this, or that it was a cleaning. The international system, at this point, is tired of this guy, Bemba, and they decided to get rid of him, meaning the most powerful people decided to fight against him and his powerful people and get rid of him, get him out of the scene, so that these corporations, which include, you know, humanitarian interests like the IRC or CARE International, they can make their profits, or big mining companies, or petroleum companies, or AIDS pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, which is very close to the Condoleezza Rice, and also the Clintons. And this little war on the 22nd lasted about 3 days. They just blasted each other back and forth. Bemba put child soldiers on the street. They're called Kidogo. You get children, you give them a gun, and you put them in the front, and when the troops come to fight against them, they're the first people that will be shot, and then the real hardened, battle-hardened soldiers are in the back. So troops from both sides, Kabila's formal troops and Bemba's fighters, fought it out for 3 or 4 days, completely destroying the city in many places, going into banks and shooting up innocent people. After it was all done, and then I think it was the ambassador of the German embassy said, at least 600 people dead. But the reality is that it was probably around 1,500 at least, and maybe as many as 2,000, and it could even be over that, people that were actually killed. They came with dump trucks and they picked up the dead bodies. These are innocent people, not soldiers. They also picked up the soldiers. They picked up the dead bodies and they took them and threw them in mass graves. The morgue was full of bodies. People were picked up in dump trucks and dumped in the Congo River. There was no accounting for the number of bodies. So you've got all of these dimensions that were never recorded. First of all, it was a war about profits and mining and establishing control by the international capitalist system. Second, the number of people killed. Third, how they were killed. Fourth, who did the killing? who backs up these guys? And then the question, why didn't the United Nations peacekeeping operation stop it? The United Nations played a very powerful role in establishing the current situation in Congo, which is, from my point of view, and from the point of view of Congolese people that are calling me or emailing me, dictatorship. And it's becoming even more institutionalized every single day. You asked me, who is Kabila? You know, what's the story with this guy Kabila? The fact is, I think he saw this older guy, Laurent Kabila, assassinated. He saw him assassinated on exactly the day that they wanted to assassinate him, exactly the way that they wanted. When they assassinated Laurent Kabila, they did it in January, I think it was 2001, exactly 40 years after, and on exactly the same day or the day after, they assassinated Patrice Lumumba. They could have assassinated him in October, but they didn't. They assassinated him. They waited for the day that Patrice Lumumba was killed, and they assassinated him on that day exactly 40 years later. And Joseph Kabila saw that, and I'm sure he takes that as a message that, you know, he has to do what he's there to do. But the fact is, he's also not any kind of a leader. He's not serving the people of Congo. They're making incredible amounts of money. You know, there's all kinds of corruption.
I'm speaking with journalist and human rights investigator Keith Snow. Today's show, Blood Diamonds and Devastation in Congo. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Earlier, you mentioned Maurice Tempelsman of the Lazar Kaplan International, the diamond business, and you just now mentioned Patrice Lumumba. Now, doesn't Maurice Tempelsman go back to the 1950s, and didn't he have some involvement in that assassination of Patrice Lumumba?
Patrice Lumumba and the assassination of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. In fact, according to Janine Roberts, who's written a book called Glitter and Gold, which is about the diamond cartels, and she's FOIA'd Freedom of Information Act, or looked at all these documents, Maurice Tempelsman was likely involved in every single covert operation that's occurred in Africa since somewhere in the late 1950s when they assassinated, of course they assassinated Patrice Lumumba, I think it was 1960 or 61. But every single covert operation since then probably involved Maurice Tempelsman. Who is Maurice Tempelsman? Another untouchable. You don't see him in the media. He was Jackie Kennedy's lover. One of the partners in his Lazar Kaplan International Diamond Company today is part of the law firm that was the law firm for President Kennedy. He was very close to the Kennedys. Of course, as I said, he became the lover of Jacqueline Onassis for years until she died in 1994. Then he had a romantic tryst apparently with Madeleine Albright, which was, I think, as politically motivated as it might have been romantically motivated, because if you look at what Albright was doing in the era during her power in the Clinton administration and what happened in Africa, where Tempelsman's interests are, you have to ask, what was he really up to? Tempelsman in the 1960s helped organize the coup d'etat of the Congo, meaning as independence came to Congo and the people rose up and started to declare their own rights as human beings, Maurice Tempelsman stepped in with the help of Adlai Stevenson, whose law firm represented Tempelsman, and with Kennedy, of course. And then later, Tempelsman had all these connections to every single administration since then. The station chief for the CIA in Lumumbashi in the south, in Katanga, Lawrence Devlin, worked to make sure that Tempelsman's interests were served through the CIA in the 1960s and 70s. And then he went to work for Tempelsman independently in the 1980s. Tempelsman's connections to the Council on Foreign Relations and to people like Frank Wisner. Who? Exactly. Frank Wisner. Frank Wisner's father helped organize Operation Mockingbird, which was the infiltration of the American media by the CIA. Tempelsman's connections to the intelligence community and to the Pentagon are incredibly deep, partly because in the 1960s he provided, at huge profit for himself, an unnecessary expense to the United States government and people, a huge industrial diamond stockpile that he claimed was necessary and that his people helped make happen. So all these diamonds were sold into the United States government. Tempelsman has funded and funds just about every single prominent Democrat you can name. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Richard Gephardt. The list goes on and on. All of these people who serve his enterprise and keep it very well hidden. You don't see him